I know we have a lot to talk about on the new economy, but first I want to get to the budget that came out this morning, and really the impact it would have on inequality and poverty, which is what we're talking about.
Well, so much for foreplay.
Yes, right.
I also feel
welcome, Senator. It's good to have you here. Thank you. Now about that
really
budget.
Bad. The last speaker was getting so much applause and laughter. And now you got a politician. Two things. First, before I get to the budget, one, we all ought to, you probably have all seen the announcement that after taking Aspen from here all the way to here,
thank you.
Walter is going to leave head of Aspen at the end of the year, but he has done a great job.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
And not only do I say that because he's allowed me to do this whole future of work initiative at Aspen, but
right.
He's a great friend and somebody who's a great leader. And we were talking about, going back home, especially when you see a budget like the president's skinny budget. I've seen skinny. I was part of the so-called Gang of Six a few years ago. I still think I'm one of the few folks that are concerned about our overall debt level at $20 trillion. But this is not the way you go skinny. This is a budget that, for the last few years, we've had cuts or increases relatively equal between defense and non-defense. This budget dramatically ramps up defense, candidly in areas even the Joint Chiefs have not asked for. But at the same time, in a world that's so complex, just slashes the heck 26% out of State Department, which is where America shows soft power, and AID, and even folks who are as pro-military as Lindsey Graham acknowledges if we can solve a problem without putting troops on the ground, that's net better for our country. It cuts the EPA at north of 30%, so all of the people who were concerned whether this president was going to really try to dismantle clean air, clean water, climate change, you got proof right here. It takes, for those of us who live in the region, completely eliminates the Chesapeake Bay program. For a state like mine, where we talk about challenges around inequality, something that has been around for 40 years that's helped in small ways leverage dollars, 7 or 8 to 1, the Appalachian Regional Commission, gone. For those of us, and I say this with a mom who passed with Alzheimer's and a daughter with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, a great nation that's on the verge, and if you talk to folks at NIH, we are so close on so many breakthroughs, cuts NIH by 20%. And you go down the list, cuts, for those of us, again, who live in the region, we're never going to be able to pour enough asphalt, dramatically cuts Amtrak. So we are on a path with this budget, if you take tax expenditures and spending, to take investment in education, infrastructure, and R&D, which if we're talking about inequality or economic insecurity, would be things that you would increase spending. We are cutting those now to they'll be less than 5% of total federal spend. I've spent less time as a politician than I have as a business guy and a venture capitalist, as you know. I would never invest in a business that spent less than 5% of their resources on their people, their plant and equipment, and staying ahead of the competition. But that is the blueprint that was laid out today. And the good news is, I think it will have a half-life that may not last as long as the president's claims about being wiretapped by President Obama.
Meaning it will not go anywhere and there'll be a budget, you're right, or there'll be sequester, or what?
Remember, budgets are, I didn't realize this. I was a governor, I was relatively well informed. I remember when I came to the Senate, I said, oh great, I'm on the budget committee, I really know this stuff. The budget committee doesn't do much. The budget committee, the budget documents we pass are not law. The president's budget is a political document, and will probably get as many votes as the last Obama budget, which even the Democrats didn't vote for. But it'll be a starting point. There'll be back and forth. From a political standpoint, it's not the budget process, although they're using the budget process as, not to get really wonky, and I want to get into our subject matter, but to use a tool called reconciliation, which basically allows you to change the rules and do things around taxes or around dealing with the Affordable Care Act with 51 votes as opposed to 60 votes. But I think this, I will be very surprised, even in the House, I would be very surprised if what the president proposed today sees, is anything close to what we end up, where the appropriations bills end up being. So, but it's still a statement. It is still a statement of values, and to me, it is a statement of values that will not make America safer, healthier, wealthier, or smarter.
To get to the future of work thing, you have discussed for the past 5 or 6 years the notion of a new type of economy, an economy where benefits have to be portable, where people can build their own wealth. Tell me about the future of work project.
Sure. Well, first of all, the truth was I came to Walter 2.5 years ago and said, I want to work on something that's not already defined as Democrat versus Republican. My view is that and again, this may not be exactly a newsflash, but our political debate is pretty stale, and that the old notions of left versus right, red versus blue really don't work anymore. In the meantime, our economy is changing at a speed that makes the changes that took place in the 90s look like chicken feed. Automation, globalization, we haven't even dealt with the beginning ramifications of artificial intelligence. The notion of the social contract that worked for 70 years that said, if you go to work for a firm, you're going to probably work there like my dad worked for one company for 38 years. He didn't make a lot of money, but he had security, he had predictability, he knew there was going to be some kind of retirement benefit, he had some kind of social contract. Now, today in America, and I started with this on the gig economy, but the gig is still pretty small, the Ubers and Airbnbs and Lyfts and Handys. But a third of the American workforce in 2016 is in some form of contingent work. You're a freelancer, you're 1099, you're gig, you're 2 part-time jobs, you're starting a business. And that third of the workforce has absolutely zero social insurance. So even if they're doing well today, when the stuff hits the fan, as it always does, you have nothing to fall back on. You may have an ability through Obamacare to have a little health care, but you got no retirement, you got no workman's comp, you got no disability, you got no unemployment insurance. And this started with the notion of, well, can we create a benefit system that's portable, that moves with a person as they move from job to job? And one of the pieces of legislation I'm working on now is to actually try to put a pretty significant multiple millions of dollars in place at the Department of Labor that would allow experimentation on portable benefits. Because if we tried to legislate this today from the federal government standpoint, we'd screw it up.
Now, when you say portable benefits, could it be done by a private company?
It could be run by a private company.
An app? Yeah.
It could be run by an app, fintech world. It could be run by a 21st century union. In my ideal state, I'd love to see, that first job you have when you're 16 or 18, maybe a penny out of every dollar goes in and it ratchets up. And it may not be affiliated by the guild the way it used to be, because that's the way our banks used to work. But we're seeing experimentation in New York State now, Washington State, California. But we need to try more experiments. And there's a lot of mayors and governors that want to try this. And the federal government ought to both put some money behind helping this in terms of existing experiments, but also funding some new ones. And I'm hoping $25 million, because this, if candidly, and I think I can even sell this to my Republican colleagues, if you've got more of a portable benefit system in place, then when bad things happen and you have no safety net, what happens is you then fall back upon public social insurance, which is already a little bit bankrupt. So how do you meet, rather than relitigate 20th century concepts between W-2 and 1099, how do you create a beginnings of a social contract that work for where the workforce is today? Because we're not going back to the form.
And you're doing this in a bipartisan way.
And it's all bipartisan. Mitch Daniels, former Indiana governor, and been a great partner with mine. But I've got a host of Republican senators who I've been proselytizing. People are afraid to get in the car or have a cup of coffee with me. But there are a whole lot of folks on the Republican side who absolutely think this makes a lot of sense.
But the most important portable benefit, or the benefit where you get to change jobs or be in the contingent economy, is health care.
Right.
And that's what the Affordable Care Act at least established, was
right.
You can get health care not through your employer. Are we going to have that model in 2 years?
Great question, because the way the current plan is, which is not affordable or provide much coverage, it would be totally counter to the whole concept of labor flexibility and movement. Mm-hmm. Because if you still the majority of people get their employment, they get their health care through their employer. But under what has been proposed, if you move from a full-time job to you wanted to do a part-time gig and also start your own business, and you had a 3-week break or short-term break in your health insurance, if you then went back into the risk pool, you would at least be charged 30% more. So you would completely restrict the kind of labor movement.
So in other words, you can't change jobs.
You can't change jobs, which is completely the opposite of every millennial's or frankly every country, most companies' view of where the workforce is headed.
Mm-hmm. And so you think that this plan that they've proposed, I'll call it the Ryan plan.
Trump Care, Ryan Care. It is interesting that if it was really good, you'd think Trump would want to call it Trump Care. He calls it Ryan Care. Ryan calls it Trump Care.
Trump puts his name on everything except for this bill.
There's a little bit here of like, if it's really that good, why won't you call it your name?
But the main problem, there's a whole lot of problems with it, but one of it is it brings us back to an economy that's not as flexible.
It goes back to an ability that says you are not going to have mobility, particularly if you get your insurance through your employer, which I think we need to move away from. But if you have any break, if you lose your job for some reason, you don't have a mandate, yes, but you've got this huge penalty if you lose your insurance.
Is there a big deal that could be done in a bipartisan way, maybe not this year, to say, hey, health insurance should not be mainly employer-based?
I think that's where we're headed. We got a third of the workforce now that is in contingent work, and the estimate is it's going to 50% in 10 years. Then you have the 50% of them people who still have traditional health insurance. They are going to pay for everybody who's a free rider in this contingent workplace, because if they get really sick and they've got no social insurance, we're not going to turn them away at the hospital door. They're going to go into uncompensated care that raises the rates for the rest of us. But I think it begs, what it really says to me is, and I was a business guy longer than I've been a politician. I think the fundamental problem with our political debate is that you've got Trumpism on one side, and you've got some of my most progressive friends on the Democratic side. Both of these, I think, are backwards-looking theories. Massive redistribution and more regulation on the Democratic side, and I'm for more redistribution, but maybe not as much as some of my friends have said. And whatever you want to call strongmanism around Trumpism. I think what's happening is there's a fundamental beginnings of people not trusting that capitalism and free enterprise is going to work for enough people. Right. So I think we need to change the political debate. Somebody needs to advocate a pro-growth, even pro-free enterprise system that's going to be inclusive, that works for a broader group of people. And that can't be as a Democrat, it can't be a rehashed version of the 1990s. So I'd argue that means portable benefits. I would mean that if you accept the premise that people aren't going to work for the same firm for 30 years, then there is absolutely no incentive for a business to invest in upskilling or continuing to train low and moderate income people. If you make less than $70,000, chances are you're the person that's going to be first eliminated by technology, globalization, AI. And, full disclosure, I've been a governor and a senator. Most government training programs don't work very well. Business training programs work a lot better. So how can we incent business to take more responsibility to actually train people below a certain income cut line? Those of you who work for Google or Apple or Facebook, as engineers, you're on your own. Those of you who are below 70 grand or 60 grand, we got to find a way to incent you to get meaningful training. I would propose two things. One would be, maybe we think about if it's meaningful, third-party delivered, so it's not just a trip to Vegas. Third-party delivered, changing those dollars spent from a deduction to a credit, pay it out over multiple years, so you've got an ongoing incentive in the person. And people want to say, well, Warner, that makes sense, but it's never going to happen. But there will be an opportunity if we do anything in tax reform, and this isn't getting near the laughs that the last if we do anything in tax reform, we're going to do what's called repatriation, which is bring back $2.6 trillion caught overseas because of our crazy tax laws. And so far, the bid and the ask has been low rate, and Democrats want to use the money for infrastructure. I'm fine with both of that. But I think there's also an opportunity to ask of these companies who've been extraordinarily successful, if you're going to bring this money back at a very low rate, You got to put in place a meaningful, metric-driven training program for everybody in your company, and maybe even in your supply chain, who makes less than $70,000 a year. So we've got to realize there is no such thing as finishing education, and with the rate of change accelerating, you've got to have some willingness to invest in continuing to keep people current, and those incentives just aren't there right now.
But you're talking about challenging the current drift of our capitalist system, which has gone from companies that used to feel they had lots of stakeholders, including their community and their workers, to corporations that don't feel the prosperity needs to be shared and believe it's mainly just return on shareholder investment.
Walter, amen. It's like,
So what do you do?
Adam Smith did not define capitalism as just maximization of short-term value return to shareholders. There was no place in the Wealth of Nations he said that. And what we've got now is we've got a capitalism that went, I'll give you a couple little fun factoids. 40, 50 years ago, the average hold on a public stock was 8 years. Today it's 4 months. 25 years ago, 50% of corporate profits were reinvested back in the business. You built a new plant, you hired new people. Today, 95% of corporate profits are spent on share buyback and dividends. Now, that enriches some of us, but that's not the capitalism that values long-term investment.
So how do you create an inclusive capitalism?
Well, here's where I would say. I think there are a variety of things. I think part of this happened, just want to give you one more reason why I think it happened, is that I think it used to happen not because we had rules and regulations, but when the management and the workers lived in the same town, there was some reason you didn't want to go to church or synagogue or the country club and be viewed as a schmuck. That's a technical political term. You would. So there was when you disaggregate management from work, and everybody lives in New York and these are just numbers, it's easy to say, let's cut this here. When you've got people who are in not as, many CEOs come to me and they say, we don't have shareholders anymore, I got renters. So what can we do? Well, we could have a differential capital gains rate on a longer term hold. Biggest tax scam in America today is the difference in rates between whether you hold a stock 364 days or 370 days. So reward patient capital. You could change some of the reporting requirements so that you're not driven as much by that 2 cents you got to make this quarter or you're going to get penalized forever. You could have reporting judged against a 5-year plan rather than a 2-month or 1 quarter or 2 quarter plan. I could go, again, really wonky on corporate governance, but there are a set of tools that the overwhelming majority of the business community would say, yeah, that makes sense.
But how would you do that to reduce inequality? Because
part of reducing inequality, I believe, means the imbalance between capital and labor. And I did very well in business. I'm not against doing well, but the imbalance has gotten so on capital side against labor side. And if we can partially say to businesses, we're going to incent you to train people more. We're going to give you a longer time horizon in terms of how you make money. There's been plenty, I think you had a panel earlier today, that doing well by your workers, if you look over a 5-year time horizon, means you're going to make more money. It may not mean you make more money in the next quarter, and if you only got an investor that's looking for the next quarter, then you may not do as well. So here's one of the things that's happening. There's a growing body of investors, pension funds and others, more European than American at this point, that would say, we want to invest in companies that do this. They're called ESG, those kind of, but it's a mush at this point. All of you folks who are working in this space, God bless you. But we need to get the foundations to come together and put a big $50 million or $100 million X prize together. Let's have one common standard for corporates who want to invest in companies that treat their people well. Government shouldn't touch it. We'll mess it up. But we ought to have a LEED certification equivalent for responsible business. And at the same time, what gives me hope is frankly our kids. Our kids, regardless of how political are, regardless of where they fall on the normal political spectrum, want to buy from and work for companies that have a little social responsibility. So how do we build that, bake that into a capitalism? So markets, I think, will help drive this, but we haven't built that standard yet.
You said earlier in this conversation that the parties are getting more and more polarized, including your party, the Democratic Party and stuff. Is there ever going to be a chance for a new movement that's focused not on, for a new movement?
Well, I would say yes, because if you say portable benefits, if you say business-trained incentives for meaningful ongoing training, not just how you get your first job, but how you continue to be skilled up for people below a certain income cut line, and we're going to run it through a business. If you say to corporate America, we're going to give you a little relief from the extraordinary short-termism driven by activists, we're going to let you look at a longer time horizon. And if we're going to say government's not going to mess this up, but we're going to encourage the NGOs and investors and consumers to have facts at their hand in terms of who treats their workers well, I don't know whether those are Democrat or Republican ideas. And wouldn't it be great if we were arguing about this stuff? You know, it falls more future past than it does liberal conservative. And what I'm so afraid of, you know, beyond this president's budget and some of his ideas, are the fact that if we simply relitigate all the same issues we've been relitigating for the last 25 years, where everybody's already got an entrenched position, unless one party completely sweeps, and I'm not sure I'm going to see that happening, we got to get out of this rut.
So how does that happen? How do you?
Well,
I mean, the Senate used to do that.
Well, I think there still is some chance on the Senate. I think, you know, if we could try some of this work with the Department of Labor around portable benefits. I mean, that sounds like a Republican idea. It may not, because it may not have to all be government administered. The idea of using repatriation to force real, meaningful workforce training for low and moderate income people. I think the American public, regardless, would say, yeah, Apple, yeah, Microsoft, yeah, GE, if you're bringing back money at 15%, you need to do something other than just let us use those taxes for infrastructure. You got to do something for the American worker. You know, I think there is a real acknowledgement in this debate between finance and it's more a finance business than Democrat-Republican around long-termism versus short-termism. You know, this debate is really bubbling up now in a way that we've not seen ever in my career as a business guy or political guy. So I think there's a moment, but we got to put some points on the board.
Yeah, well, we're in a moment now with both Trump, but it's not just Trump. It's Paul Ryan, the Senate, the House, everybody. There's been a massive reaction against helping people, community, social spending. Why did that happen? I mean, this is not just Trump's election. This is legislatures across America that have gone Tea Party and gone Republican. And one of the common themes is, let's get rid of helping people in our community. This is
maybe a little provocative, but it's just, I think what happened, and as a Democrat, I believe strongly in this. I think we have spent so much time trying to help some of our most challenged folks get that first job or education, which we still need to do. But, you know, it's the bottom 5, 7, 8, picture, whatever number. That then people say from 10% to 60%, who are struggling as well right now because so much change.
So you talk about the struggling working class that feels resentment.
And that's people, you know, that's the fact that 47% of Americans can't absorb a $400 bill without going into hock. That's unprecedented. Mm-hmm. So you got a whole group of people that feel vulnerable, and I'm not sure it's all income inequality, or you wouldn't have Trump. But there is income insecurity.
So the Democrats failed to talk to that?
I think we didn't talk to it. I think we didn't appreciate income insecurity enough. And I think that what we also felt was that, and we need to do a better job, you know, we all live in a personal app-driven world. Yet government especially delivers programs almost normally all in one size fits all. It's not flexible enough, it doesn't move enough, and somewhere we got to figure out ways to deliver. You know, Democrats always scratch their head, gosh, if people had voted in their own economic self-interest, we'd have X% of the vote and we'd have all these things. You know, I get out and around.
But they voted what instead? On their resentments?
I think they voted on the fact that they didn't really believe that a massive new government program, as well-intentioned, was going to actually help their life. So how do we think about different ways to connect with people who are in this stage of economic insecurity? And that's where I'm saying it doesn't all have to be government. If there's a way that we can create portable benefits that are run by 21st century unions or run by 21st century fintech companies.
But the Democratic Party used to stand for both helping the less advantaged of our society and also helping the working class of our society. Why did you let that wedge happen between the two?
I don't take full responsibility for letting that happen. I won rural Virginia. So I think that, you know, part of this, I think we ended up emphasizing one over the other. We lost from the working. And I also think I'm guilty of this as well. I'm pro-trade, I'm pro-globalization. But we did a really crappy job helping communities that were dislocated by trade. Trade Assistance Act and others were awfully failed programs. We've had, metropolitan areas have done well. Rural communities have not. We said back in the 90s, I remember some of you may be old enough, there was a cover story when Time was still a big magazine that...
Hey, I used to work there.
I know
So
that,
did Amanda.
So did you. I know that when you were still there, when they had who's more powerful, Bill Gates or Bill Clinton? And there was this promise in a globalized world, you can build it anywhere. Mm-hmm. And we've shown you can build it in Mumbai and Shanghai. We've not shown you can build it very well in Southwest Virginia or rural Ohio or upstate Michigan. And the truth of the matter is, in a distributed network, we've got distributed networks except around our workplace. There's no reason we can't put low to mid-tech jobs, and not just call center, mid-tech jobs. Proudest day I had as governor was when we brought, what was originally 400, 700 mid-tech jobs to a little town called Lebanon, Virginia, which is about 100 miles from nowhere. And kids came up and said, I don't have to leave my hometown right now. And those little starts and stops, we were talking backstage, I know our time's running out. There is a renaissance happening in small communities around America, trying to figure that out and how we nurture more of that, trying to show that the winners in a globalized world can be everywhere and not just in Washington and New York and LA, is one of I think, the challenges of our time.
And to just make a little bit of news, you don't have to announce you're running for president, but if you were, what would be the bigger themes, not down at repatriation, but for bringing us back together to caring about each other?
We got a little problem with Russia we got to deal with first. But I think that if I could be part of something, not running for anything, but just changing the debate to making the debate about how do you make free enterprise or capitalism work in the 21st century for everybody? The system is still pretty good, but it's not working for enough people. And the alternatives that are being offered aren't going to work in a globalized, technology-driven world. So, capitalism 2.0, or making capitalism work for everybody. That's a theme that's worth a good debate.
Senator Warner, thank you for being with
Walter.
us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.